Thomas Muller was a man of routine. Each morning, he awoke in his modest apartment in the heart of Berlin's Charlottenburg district, the soft light of dawn filtering through the curtains. At precisely 7 a.m., he would shuffle into the kitchen, the familiar creak of the floorboards echoing his solitary existence. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air as he prepared for another day, settling down with a newspaper that often mirrored his own outlook on life, cynical and detached. For Thomas, life was a series of predictable patterns. He took the same route to work every day, avoiding distractions and disruptions. But there was one thing that could shatter his carefully constructed world: dogs. His aversion to dogs was rooted in a childhood trauma that haunted him like a shadow. He vividly recalled the day he was chased by a pack of barking dogs while playing in the park with friends. The memory was etched into his mind, the fear, the chaos, and the tears that followed as he fled home, convinced that he would never feel safe around those creatures again. From that moment on, dogs became synonymous with unpredictability and danger. As an adult, Thomas had cultivated a life that revolved around avoiding dogs at all costs. He would cross the street to steer clear of dog walkers and roll his eyes at the sight of pet owners doting on their furry companions as if they were children. "It's just a dog," he would mutter under his breath, dismissing their affection as foolishness. His colleagues at the office often teased him about his disdain for dogs, but Thomas brushed off their comments with a wave of his hand and a curt smile. They didn't understand. They hadn't lived through what he had. On this particular day, as Thomas made his way to work, he noticed a group of dog owners gathered in a nearby park. They laughed and chatted while their dogs played together, tails wagging joyfully. Thomas quickened his pace, feeling a familiar surge of irritation rise within him. Why did people insist on treating their pets like family? It was absurd. As he crossed the street to avoid the park, something caught his eye: a small figure huddled against the wall of an alleyway just beyond the park's entrance. Curiosity piqued despite himself, Thomas paused for a moment to look closer. There it was, a tiny puppy, shivering and whimpering softly. Its fur was matted and dirty, and one of its legs appeared injured. Thomas's heart skipped a beat, not from empathy but from annoyance at the sight before him. Another abandoned dog, he thought bitterly. Why can't people take responsibility? Yet something about the puppy's helplessness stirred an unfamiliar feeling within him, a flicker of concern that he quickly dismissed as foolishness. He turned to leave but felt an inexplicable tug at his heartstrings, compelling him to step closer. "Get it together," he muttered under his breath as he approached the puppy cautiously. It looked up at him with big, pleading eyes that seemed to penetrate through his defenses. For a brief moment, Thomas felt trapped between two worlds, the one where he could walk away without guilt and the one where compassion beckoned him forward. He took a deep breath and knelt down beside the shivering creature. "What am I doing?" he whispered to himself as he reached out hesitantly to touch the puppy's fur. It flinched slightly but then leaned into his hand, seeking warmth and comfort. Thomas's resolve began to waver. The puppy needed help. He could see that clearly now, but helping it meant confronting everything he had built around himself, walls of disdain and indifference that had protected him for so long. After what felt like an eternity of internal struggle, Thomas made a decision that would change everything. He would take this injured puppy to a vet. As he scooped it up gently into his arms, feeling its small body tremble against him, he realized that this moment might just be the beginning of something unforeseen, a journey into uncharted territory where love and vulnerability awaited just beyond the horizon. With Max cradled against his chest, Thomas stepped back onto the bustling streets of Berlin, unaware that this small act of kindness would unravel everything he thought he knew about himself and lead him toward healing in ways he could never have imagined. The streets of Berlin bustled with life as Thomas walked toward the veterinary clinic, the small puppy cradled in his arms. He felt the weight of the world pressing down on him, a mix of anxiety and uncertainty swirling in his gut. He had never been one to seek out connections, especially with animals, yet here he was, carrying an injured creature that needed him. The irony was not lost on him. As he navigated through the throngs of pedestrians, Thomas couldn't help but notice the curious glances cast his way. A man in a tailored suit raised an eyebrow as he passed, while a group of teenagers laughed and whispered among themselves. Thomas tightened his grip on Max, the puppy's soft whimpers reminding him of the responsibility he had just taken on. Arriving at the clinic, he pushed through the glass door, a small bell chiming overhead. The waiting room was filled with the sounds of barking dogs and anxious owners. Thomas hesitated for a moment, feeling out of place amidst the chaos. He had always preferred solitude, yet now he found himself surrounded by people who shared a bond with their pets that he could scarcely comprehend. "Can I help you?" A cheerful voice broke through his thoughts. A young woman with bright red hair stood behind the reception desk, her smile warm and inviting. "Yes," Thomas replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "I found this puppy in an alley. I think it's injured." He gently shifted Max in his arms to show her. "Oh no." The receptionist's expression shifted to concern as she leaned over to get a better look. "Let me take a look at him." Thomas reluctantly handed over Max, feeling an unexpected pang of loss as the puppy was taken from his arms. The receptionist cradled Max carefully and led him into the back room for examination. As he waited in the sterile environment of the clinic, Thomas's mind raced with thoughts and emotions he had long buried. Why had he chosen to help this puppy? What compelled him to break free from his self-imposed isolation? He glanced around at the other pet owners. Some were comforting their dogs, others were chatting animatedly about their pets' antics, and felt a strange sense of longing. After what felt like an eternity, the receptionist returned with a vet named Drive. Fisher, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and an easy smile. "Mr. Muller?" he asked as he approached Thomas. "Yes," Thomas replied, feeling slightly nervous under the vet's scrutiny. "We've examined Max, Drive," Fisher said gently. "He has a dislocated leg and some minor abrasions. We'll need to set his leg and give him some medication for pain and infection." Thomas nodded, trying to process this information. "Will he be okay?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Absolutely, Drive," Fisher reassured him. "With proper care, he'll make a full recovery." Relief washed over Thomas like a cool breeze on a hot day. He hadn't realized how much he had been holding on to until that moment, how much fear had gripped him at the thought of losing this small creature that had unexpectedly entered his life. "Thank you," Thomas said sincerely, feeling gratitude swell within him. As Dr. Fisher took Max back for treatment, Thomas settled into one of the waiting room chairs, staring blankly at a dog-themed calendar hanging on the wall. Each month featured an adorable puppy or dog in various poses, playing in leaves, splashing in water, or snuggling with children. He found himself captivated by their innocence and joy, a stark contrast to his own guarded existence. Minutes turned into what felt like hours before Drive. Fisher returned with Max wrapped snugly in a soft blanket, a small cast on his leg. "He'll need some rest and regular checkups, Drive," Fisher explained as he handed Max back to Thomas. "You did well bringing him in." Thomas cradled Max once more, feeling an overwhelming sense of protectiveness wash over him. The puppy looked up at him with those big brown eyes, eyes that seemed to hold an entire universe of trust and vulnerability. "Let's get you home," Thomas murmured softly as they exited the clinic together. As they stepped back into the bustling streets of Berlin, something inside Thomas began to shift imperceptibly. He felt lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The world around him was still noisy and chaotic, but now it felt different, it felt alive. With each step toward home, Thomas realized that this chance encounter was not just about saving a puppy, it was about confronting his own fears and opening himself up to new possibilities. For so long, he had built walls around his heart to keep out pain and disappointment. Now those walls were beginning to crack. As they walked side by side, Thomas navigating through life with Max nestled against him, he couldn't shake the feeling that this little creature would change everything for him in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. And perhaps for the first time in years, Thomas felt a flicker of hope ignite within him, a hope that maybe love could find its way into even the most guarded hearts. The first few days after bringing Max home were a whirlwind of new experiences for Thomas. The puppy, with his big brown eyes and fluffy coat, had quickly become the center of Thomas's world. Despite his initial reluctance, Thomas found himself waking up each morning with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Max spent most of his time nestled in a cozy bed Thomas had hastily purchased from a nearby pet store, but he also explored every nook and cranny of the apartment. He was a curious little creature, and Thomas couldn't help but smile at the sight of him stumbling around, his tiny paws patting softly against the wooden floors. The puppy's playful antics brought an unexpected warmth to the otherwise quiet space. However, caring for Max was not without its challenges. The first night at home was a restless one. Max whimpered softly in his sleep, occasionally stirring and letting out little yips that tugged at Thomas's heartstrings. He had set up a makeshift bed for the puppy next to his own, but as the hours dragged on, Thomas found himself unable to sleep, listening intently to every sound. "Why am I doing this?" he muttered to himself as he tossed and turned in bed. "I've never even liked dogs." Yet, as dawn broke and the first rays of sunlight filtered through the window, Thomas felt an undeniable bond forming between him and Max. The puppy needed him, and that realization ignited something deep within, a flicker of responsibility that began to overshadow his long-standing aversion to dogs. Over the next few days, Thomas settled into a routine that revolved around Max's needs. He learned how to feed him properly, administer medication as prescribed by Dr. Fisher, and even navigate the complexities of puppy training. Each small victory brought a sense of accomplishment that surprised him. "Good boy," he exclaimed one afternoon as Max successfully followed a simple command to sit. The puppy wagged his tail enthusiastically, clearly pleased with himself. In that moment, Thomas felt a rush of joy that was foreign yet exhilarating. Yet beneath the surface of this newfound happiness lay an undercurrent of anxiety. Every time Max limped slightly or let out a soft whine, Thomas's heart-aching creature who relied on him entirely. One evening after work, as Thomas prepared dinner in the kitchen, he glanced over at Max who was lying on his bed, chewing on a rubber toy. The sight brought a smile to his face, but soon it faded as memories from his past crept back in, memories of fear and loss that threatened to overwhelm him. Raced with worry. He had never been responsible for anyone but himself. Now he was tasked with caring for a living creature who relied on him entirely. One evening after work, as Thomas prepared dinner in the kitchen, he glanced over at Max who was lying on his bed, chewing on a rubber toy. The sight brought a smile to his face, but soon it faded as memories from his past crept back in, memories of fear and loss that threatened to overwhelm him. Suddenly overwhelmed by emotion, Thomas set down the knife he had been using to chop vegetables and sank into a chair at the kitchen table. He buried his face in his hands, feeling tears prick at the corners of his eyes. "What is wrong with me?" he whispered into the silence. Max sensed something was amiss. He dropped his toy and padded over to Thomas's feet, looking up at him with concern. The puppy nuzzled against Thomas's leg, offering comfort in his own innocent way. Thomas looked down at Max and felt an unexpected wave of gratitude wash over him. Here was this little creature, vulnerable yet resilient, who had entered his life just when he needed it most. In that moment of despair, Max became more than just a pet. He was a companion who could help heal old wounds. Taking a deep breath, Thomas wiped away his tears and reached down to scratch behind Max's ears. "I'm sorry," he murmured softly. "I didn't mean to worry you." As days turned into weeks, Max continued to heal both physically and emotionally. His legs slowly regained strength under Thomas's careful watch. Soon enough, the little puppy was bounding around the apartment with newfound energy. Each leap and bound filled Thomas with pride and joy, a stark contrast to the isolation he had previously embraced. One sunny Saturday morning, after a particularly successful training session where Max learned how to fetch a small ball, Thomas decided it was time for their first outing together, a short walk around the neighborhood. With Max secured in a harness and leash, something Thomas had painstakingly researched online, they stepped outside into the fresh air. The world felt different somehow. Colors seemed brighter, sounds sharper as they ventured into the bustling streets of Berlin. At first, Max was hesitant. He sniffed at everything with wide-eyed curiosity, taking in the sights and smells that surrounded him. But soon enough, he began to trot alongside Thomas confidently, tail wagging exuberantly. As they walked past cafes filled with people enjoying their morning coffee and families playing in nearby parks, Thomas felt an unfamiliar sense of belonging wash over him. For so long, he had avoided these spaces out of fear and disdain for dogs. Now he found himself smiling at other dog owners who greeted them warmly. "Isn't he adorable?" an elderly woman cooed as she approached them with her own small dog, a fluffy Pomeranian named Bella. "Yes," Thomas replied shyly as Max wagged his tail excitedly at Bella's presence. "His name is Max." "Max, what a lovely name," she said with genuine warmth before continuing on her way. As they walked further along the tree-lined streets, Something shifted within Thomas, a realization that perhaps there was more to life than solitude and bitterness. With each passing moment spent alongside Max, he felt walls crumbling around his heart. That evening after their walk, filled with laughter from children playing outside and distant music from street performers, Thomas sat on his couch with Max curled up beside him. He absent-mindedly scratched behind the puppy's ears while reflecting on how much had changed since their chance encounter just weeks ago. In those quiet moments together, just man and dog, Thomas began to understand that healing wasn't just about tending to physical wounds, it was about allowing oneself to feel again, to embrace vulnerability instead of shunning it. As night fell over Berlin and stars twinkled outside his window like distant dreams waiting to be realized, Thomas knew deep down that this journey with Max was only beginning, and perhaps it would lead him toward discovering not only who he could be but also what it truly meant to love unconditionally. The weeks passed quickly, and with each day, Thomas found himself growing more attached to Max. The little puppy had transformed from a trembling, injured creature into a lively companion who filled his apartment with energy and warmth. Thomas had never imagined that a dog could bring such joy into his life, but here he was, laughing at Max's antics and eagerly anticipating their daily walks. However, as much as Thomas cherished their time together, an underlying anxiety began to creep in. He had always been guarded, and the thought of losing Max, this unexpected source of happiness, terrified him. He had never allowed himself to be vulnerable before. What if he opened his heart only to have it shattered again? One crisp autumn morning, Thomas awoke to the sound of rain tapping against his window. He groaned softly, pulling the covers over his head. Max, however, was undeterred by the dreary weather. The puppy bounced around the apartment, barking playfully as if urging Thomas to join him in the day's adventures. Okay, I'm up. Thomas finally relented, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. He smiled at Max's enthusiasm and felt a surge of affection for the little creature who had entered his life so unexpectedly. After breakfast, they settled in for a cozy morning together. Thomas curled up on the couch with a book while Max lay beside him, occasionally glancing up as if to check that his new owner was still there. It was a peaceful moment, a rarity in Thomas's previously solitary life. But as the day wore on and the rain continued to pour outside, Thomas noticed something unsettling about Max. The puppy seemed restless, pacing around the apartment and whining softly. Concerned, Thomas set his book aside and knelt down beside him. "What's wrong, buddy?" he asked gently, scratching behind Max's ears. The puppy looked up at him with wide eyes that seemed to convey worry rather than playfulness. After a few moments of observation, Thomas decided it was best to call Drive Fisher for advice. He dialed the clinic's number with a sense of urgency in his chest. "Hello, this is Dr. Fisher's office," a voice answered cheerfully. "Hi," Thomas said, trying to keep his voice steady. "This is Thomas Muller. I adopted a puppy named Max recently, and I think he might be feeling unwell." "Let me check our records," the receptionist replied before putting him on hold. Thomas paced anxiously around the living room while waiting for her response. What if something was seriously wrong? What if he had inadvertently caused Max pain? His mind raced with worst-case scenarios. When the receptionist returned, she informed him that Dr. Fisher could see them right away. "Just come in whenever you're ready," she said kindly. "Thank you," Thomas replied before hanging up. He took a deep breath and looked down at Max, who was now sitting quietly by his feet. "Looks like we're going back to the vet," he said softly. The drive to the clinic felt longer than usual as rain continued to pour down in sheets. With each passing moment, anxiety twisted in Thomas's stomach like a coiled spring. He parked the car and hurried inside with Max tucked under his arm. Dr. Fisher greeted them warmly but quickly shifted into professional mode as he examined Max. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked while checking the puppy's leg and overall demeanor. "He's been acting restless today," Thomas explained nervously. "He seems off." Dr. Fisher nodded thoughtfully as he continued his examination. After several minutes of checking Max's vitals and observing his behavior, he turned to Thomas with a reassuring smile. "Max is perfectly healthy," he said gently. "Sometimes puppies can feel anxious or restless due to changes in their environment or even just boredom." Thomas sighed in relief but felt embarrassed for having worried so much. "I guess I've been overreacting," he admitted sheepishly. It's completely normal for new pet owners to feel this way, Drive. Fisher reassured him with a chuckle. You're doing great. Just make sure he gets plenty of exercise and mental stimulation. After discussing some training techniques and activities to keep Max engaged, they left the clinic feeling lighter than when they arrived. As they drove home through the rain-soaked streets of Berlin, Thomas couldn't shake off a lingering sense of unease that had settled in his chest during their visit to the vet. Despite Drive Fisher's reassurances, he realized that he was grappling with deeper fears rooted in vulnerability and loss that had plagued him for years. That evening after dinner, as they curled up together on the couch once more, Max resting comfortably against him, Thomas found himself lost in thought. The warmth radiating from the puppy felt soothing against his skin, yet beneath it lay an undercurrent of dread that threatened to surface again. What if something happens to you? He whispered into the silence of their small apartment. What if I lose you? Max stirred slightly but remained nestled against him, oblivious to Thomas's turmoil. In that moment of vulnerability, tears welled up in Thomas's eyes as memories flooded back. The fear of abandonment from childhood that had shaped so much of who he was today. The walls he had built around himself were crumbling under the weight of love and connection. Suddenly overwhelmed by emotion, Thomas wrapped his arms around Max tightly and buried his face in the puppy's soft fur. I'm scared, he admitted softly through muffled breaths. I don't want to lose you. Max responded by licking Thomas's face playfully as if sensing his distress and wanting nothing more than to comfort him in return. Through that simple act, a small gesture from an innocent creature, Thomas felt something shift within him once more. It was as if Max understood everything without needing words, a bond forged not just through companionship but through shared emotions that transcended fear itself. In that moment of clarity amidst uncertainty came an epiphany. Love inherently carried risks of pain and loss, but it also held immeasurable rewards, the joy of connection and healing that could transform even the most guarded hearts. As night fell over Berlin once more, darkness enveloping them like a protective blanket, Thomas realized that this journey with Max was not merely about caring for a puppy. It was about confronting his own fears head-on, embracing vulnerability instead of shunning it, and learning what it truly meant to love unconditionally despite life's uncertainties. With renewed determination settling within him like warmth on a cold night, Thomas closed his eyes tightly against tears, this time tears not just born from fear but also from hope. For perhaps together they could navigate whatever challenges lay ahead. Together they could heal old wounds while forging new paths filled with love and understanding along the way. As the days turned into weeks, Thomas found himself increasingly immersed in life with Max. The little puppy had become a source of joy and companionship, filling the void that had long lingered in Thomas's heart. Their bond deepened with each passing day, but beneath the surface of this newfound happiness lay a growing realization. Thomas was beginning to change. One crisp Saturday morning, Thomas awoke to the sound of birds chirping outside his window. Sunlight streamed into his apartment, casting a warm glow over everything. He stretched and glanced over at Max, who was curled up in his bed, still fast asleep. A smile crept across Thomas's face as he watched the puppy's tiny chest rise and fall. Time for an adventure, Max, he whispered softly, nudging the puppy awake. After their usual routine of breakfast and a quick bathroom break, Thomas decided it was time to take Max on a proper outing. He had been hesitant to venture far from home, worried about how Max would react to new environments. But today felt different. Today felt like a turning point. They headed to the nearby Tiergarten, one of Berlin's largest parks. As they approached the entrance, Thomas felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. The park was bustling with families, joggers, and other dog owners enjoying the sunny day. The atmosphere was vibrant and alive, a stark contrast to the solitude he had grown accustomed to. With Max on his leash, Thomas stepped into the park, taking in the sights and sounds around him. Children laughed as they played frisbee, couples strolled hand in hand, dogs chased one another with unbridled enthusiasm. For a moment, Thomas felt an overwhelming sense of belonging wash over him. "Let's go explore," he said to Max, who wagged his tail eagerly in response. As they walked along the winding paths, Thomas noticed how other dog owners greeted him with friendly smiles and nods. It was as if they shared an unspoken bond, a connection forged through their love for their pets. For the first time in years, Thomas felt himself opening up to strangers, drawn into conversations about their dogs and shared experiences. "Isn't he adorable?" a woman exclaimed as her golden retriever bounded over to greet them. "What's his name?" "This is Max," Thomas replied, feeling a sense of pride swell within him as he introduced his puppy. "He's such a cutie." "How old is he?" she asked, kneeling down to pet Max. "About 3 months," Thomas said, watching as Max eagerly licked the woman's hand. As they chatted about their dogs and exchanged stories about their lives, Thomas felt something shift within him, a realization that perhaps he had been too quick to judge others based on his past experiences. These people were not just dog owners, they were individuals who understood love and companionship in ways he had long shunned. After saying goodbye to the woman and her retriever, Thomas continued walking through the park with renewed energy. He allowed himself to be present in the moment, taking in the laughter of children playing nearby and the rustling leaves overhead. With each step alongside Max, he felt walls that had once seemed impenetrable begin to crumble. Later that afternoon, they found a quiet spot under a large oak tree where they could rest. Thomas sat down on the grass with Max beside him, who promptly flopped onto his back for a belly rub. As he scratched behind Max's ears, Thomas reflected on how far they had come together since that fateful day when he found the puppy abandoned in that alleyway. In those moments of tranquility, just man and dog, Thomas began to understand that healing wasn't just about tending to physical wounds, it was also about allowing oneself to feel again, to embrace vulnerability instead of shunning it. He realized that by opening his heart to Max, he was also opening himself up to new experiences and connections with others. As dusk settled over the park and colors began to fade into twilight, Thomas felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude wash over him. He had entered this journey expecting only to care for a puppy. Instead, he found himself rediscovering joy and connection, something he thought he had lost forever. On their way home that evening, with Max trotting happily beside him, Thomas knew that this journey was only just beginning. He was ready to embrace whatever came next, ready to confront his fears head-on and allow love back into his life. With each passing day spent with Max by his side, Thomas felt hope blossoming within him like spring flowers breaking through winter's frost, a hope that perhaps life held more possibilities than he had ever dared to imagine before. As winter settled over Berlin, the city transformed into a picturesque wonderland, blanketed in soft white snow. Thomas and Max embraced the change in seasons with enthusiasm, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. The cold air invigorated Thomas, reminding him of the warmth that Max brought into his life. One Saturday morning, Thomas bundled up in his thickest coat, scarf, and gloves before heading out for their first real snowfall together. Max, with his fluffy coat and bright eyes, seemed to sense the excitement in the air as he bounced around the apartment, ready for adventure. "Let's go, buddy," Thomas called, laughing as Max dashed toward the door, his tiny paws slipping on the hardwood floor. They stepped outside into the winter wonderland, and Thomas was immediately struck by the beauty surrounding them. Snowflakes danced through the air like tiny fairies, settling softly on Max's fur. The puppy leapt into the snowdrifts, barking joyfully as he burrowed his nose into the powdery white ground. "Look at you go," Thomas cheered, feeling a sense of freedom he hadn't experienced in years. He watched as Max rolled around in the snow, his tail wagging furiously. The sight filled Thomas with warmth and happiness that radiated from deep within. As they walked through the park, Thomas noticed families building snowmen and children laughing as they engaged in snowball fights. For the first time since adopting Max, he felt a sense of belonging, not just as a dog owner but as part of a community that celebrated life's simple joys. "Let's join them," he said to Max, who looked up at him with eager eyes. They approached a group of children who were building a snowman. "Can we help?" Thomas asked, surprising himself with his eagerness to engage. "Sure," one of the kids exclaimed, grinning widely. "We need more snow." Together they rolled large snowballs and stacked them high while Max frolicked nearby, occasionally darting in to investigate their progress. Laughter filled the air as they decorated their snowman with sticks for arms and a carrot for a nose. As they finished their creation, a jolly snowman adorned with a scarf, Thomas felt a sense of fulfillment wash over him. He was no longer just an observer, he was an active participant in life's beautiful moments. After saying goodbye to the children and their snowman masterpiece, Thomas and Max continued their walk through the park. The sun began to set behind the trees, casting a golden glow over everything. It was breathtaking, a reminder of how beautiful life could be when one opened their heart to new experiences. Later that evening, back at home, Thomas settled onto the couch with Max curled up beside him. The warmth of their shared space felt comforting as they watched snowflakes continue to fall outside the window. "Today was amazing," Thomas said softly to Max, scratching behind his ears. "I never thought I could enjoy winter like this." Max looked up at him with those big brown eyes that seemed to understand every word. In that moment, Thomas realized how far he had come since that fateful day when he found Max abandoned in an alleyway. The puppy had not only healed physically but had also helped mend Thomas's own wounded heart. With each passing day spent together, each adventure shared, Thomas learned more about love and vulnerability than he ever thought possible. He had faced his fears head-on and discovered that opening oneself up to love meant embracing both joy and pain. As winter deepened and days turned into weeks, Thomas began volunteering at a local animal shelter, a decision inspired by his journey with Max. He wanted to help other animals find homes and share the love he had discovered through caring for his puppy. At the shelter, he met people from all walks of life, each with their own stories of love and loss. They bonded over shared experiences and laughter as they worked together to care for the animals awaiting adoption. For Thomas, it was liberating. He felt connected to something greater than himself, a community united by compassion. One evening at the shelter while helping prepare for an adoption event, Thomas met Anna, a fellow volunteer who shared his passion for animal welfare. They quickly struck up a friendship that blossomed into something deeper over time. Their conversations flowed effortlessly as they exchanged stories about their lives and dreams. "Max is lucky to have you," Anna said one day while petting a playful puppy named Bella. "You've really changed since I first met you." Thomas smiled shyly but felt warmth spread through him at her words. "I owe it all to him," he replied honestly, glancing down at Max who was happily playing nearby. As spring approached and flowers began to bloom throughout Berlin, so too did Thomas's heart, filled with hope and love for both Max and Anna. He realized that life was not just about avoiding pain, it was also about embracing joy, allowing oneself to be vulnerable enough to experience all that life had to offer. On a sunny afternoon in late March, Thomas took Anna and Max on a picnic in Tiergarten, a place that had become special to him since their first outing together months ago. They spread out a blanket under a blooming cherry blossom tree and enjoyed sandwiches while sharing laughter and stories. As they sat together surrounded by nature's beauty, the sun shining brightly above, the world felt perfect in that moment. "Thank you for being part of my life," Thomas said sincerely as he looked at Anna and then down at Max who lay contentedly beside them. Anna smiled warmly back at him before leaning down to give Max a gentle scratch behind his ears. "Thank you for letting me be part of yours." In that moment, underneath blooming trees filled with vibrant pink blossoms, Thomas understood what it truly meant to be alive, embracing love without fear, allowing oneself to heal through connection, finding joy even amidst uncertainty. As they watched petals drift lazily through the air like confetti celebrating new beginnings, Thomas knew that this journey was only just beginning, and together they would navigate whatever challenges lay ahead. Together they would continue discovering what it meant to love unconditionally while forging new paths filled with hope along the way. With Max by his side, his loyal companion, and Anna sharing in their adventures, Thomas felt ready for anything life had in store. Ready not just for love but also for all its beautiful complexities intertwined within it, a journey worth taking every step of the way.